The house did not sleep. Even after Eleanor's scream faded into the storm, the whispers beneath the floorboards continued, weaving through the cracks and hollows like invisible serpents. The air itself felt heavier, as though the walls were breathing, slowly inhaling and exhaling her fear. Eleanor pressed herself against the far wall, flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam flickered weakly as she aimed it toward the floor where the wood had begun to rise and buckle. Dark, wet stains crept along the grain, spreading outward like veins. A fetid smell filled the air, rotting earth and something metallic like blood. Her voice shook. "What do you want from me?" The house answered with silence, and then a whisper that slithered across the room. "You opened the way." Eleanor stumbled backward, her breath ragged. "I didn't open anything." But she remembered the basement, the journals, the warped floorboards, the frantic scribbles about sealing rituals and binding prayers. What if her presence had undone them? What if simply entering the house was enough to awaken whatever had been kept beneath? She needed to get out. She grabbed her coat and keys and ran to the front door. But when she turned the handle, the metal was frozen solid, her palm burning as though she had gripped dry ice. She jerked her hand away and stared as frost spread outward from the knob, crystallizing across the wood in intricate web-like patterns. Every window was sealed the same way. The storm outside was still raging, but the real danger was inside, crawling up from the bowels of the house. She backed away slowly and found herself drawn once again toward the hallway, the place where she had first heard the voices. The boards there were now visibly moving, rising and falling like the pulse of a buried heart. She thought she could see fingers pressing from underneath, pale and thin, scratching against the wood. "Please," she whispered, trembling, "please stop." The voice came again, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a chorus, dozens of overlapping voices speaking through the floor, the walls, the ceiling. "You are blood of the binder, your soul is the key." Eleanor clutched her head. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt, vibrating through her skull like electricity. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she saw flashes, quick, violent images. A woman in a black veil chanting by candlelight. A man nailing boards across a trapdoor while something pounded from below. A child screaming, voice muffled beneath the floor. Then silence. When Eleanor opened her eyes, she was no longer standing. She was kneeling in the center of the hallway, her hands pressed flat against the floorboards. Her fingernails were cracked and bleeding. She had been scratching at the wood without realizing it, and beneath her palms, the boards were warm. The warmth pulsed. Something moved underneath her hands, something soft and living. She jerked back, staring in horror as faint shapes pressed upward from beneath, the contours of faces, dozens of them, distorted and screaming in silence, their mouths open wide as if suffocating beneath an invisible shroud. Eleanor screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard. The board snapped open, revealing a dark cavity beneath. A wave of stench rolled out, mildew, decay, and something ancient. Inside, she saw the glint of metal. She reached in, her hand shaking, and pulled out a small silver locket, tarnished but still gleaming faintly in the flashlight's beam. When she opened it, she froze. Inside was a faded photograph of her own mother, younger, smiling faintly. But there was another face beside her, the man who had owned this house, her uncle, Reverend Nathaniel Harrow. Her heart thudded painfully. She flipped the locket over, and on the back were etched words in small, careful script. "To bind what cannot die, one must give blood of the same line." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Blood of the same line. That's why the whispers knew her name. That's why they called her the key. She wasn't just a visitor, she was family, and family, it seemed, had been the seal holding the evil in place. She backed away, shaking. No, 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 no. The voices began to rise again, overlapping, echoing through the house. She broke the seal, the blood returns. The binding fades. We are free. The air grew colder, dust fell from the ceiling as the entire house trembled, beams groaning like tortured bones. The lights flickered violently and then went out altogether, plunging everything into thick, smothering darkness. The only illumination came from her flashlight, but the beam was weak and dying. She aimed it toward the stairs, hopping to reach the basement again, to find whatever ritual her uncle had performed and reverse it. But the beam revealed something that made her blood turn to ice. At the top of the stairs stood a figure, tall and cloaked in darkness, its face obscured by shadow. It didn't move, didn't breathe. But as the flashlight trembled in her hand, she realized the figure was wearing a priest's collar, and in one pale hand it held an old, rusted hammer. Her uncle. Or what was left of him. Eleanor, the voice was deep, layered with distortion, echoing as if spoken from multiple mouths at once. You shouldn't have come here. She backed away, heart-pounding, tears stinging her eyes. You're dead. He took one step forward, the floor groaning under his boots. Death is not what you think it is. The shadows around him seemed to thicken, clinging to his form like smoke. His eyes were hollow pits, but within them flickered the faint red glow of something alive and hungry. I sealed them away, he rasped, voice breaking. But every seal demands a keeper. When I died, the bond weakened. They've been waiting for you. Eleanor shook her head violently. No, I won't let them take me. The Reverend tilted his head, his cracked lips twisting into a sad smile. You already let them in. Suddenly, the floor beneath her burst open, splintering in every direction. A cold hand shot up from the darkness, gripping her ankle with impossible strength. Eleanor screamed and kicked wildly, but more hands emerged, pale, skeletal, clutching at her legs, her waist, her arms. She was dragged toward the gaping hole as the whispers became a cacophony of laughter and screams. Help me, she screamed, please. Her uncle reached out one bony hand, but instead of pulling her up, he whispered, Forgive me. Then he slammed his hand to the floor, and everything went black. When Eleanor woke, she was lying in the basement, surrounded by candles that flickered with black flame. Symbols had been drawn in chalk all around her, circles, crosses, runes she couldn't read. Her uncle stood in the center, chanting in a guttural language. You can't fight them, he said between verses, but maybe I can finish what I began. The shadows on the walls began to move again, stretching and twisting into humanoid shapes, faces made of darkness, eyes glowing faintly. The voices rose in a unified scream that shook the air. Eleanor crawled backward, heart racing. What are they? Her uncle's voice cracked as he finished the chant. They were the bound ones, souls harvested and imprisoned. I used the floorboards as their tomb. The wood itself feeds them, and now... He looked at her with something like sorrow. They feed on you. The candles flickered violently, and one by one they began to extinguish. Run, he bellowed. Eleanor bolted for the stairs, but the shadows were faster. They poured across the walls, across the floor, reaching for her like living smoke. She reached the last step when something cold and wet wrapped around her throat. She gasped, clawing at it, kicking, desperate, but the darkness was strong. As she was dragged backward, she saw the last candle flicker out, plunging the room into blackness. And in that suffocating dark, a single voice whispered directly in her ear, clear, human, and filled with malice. You can't leave, Eleanor. You belong beneath the floor now. The floor above her cracked open, and from somewhere deep below came the sound of hundreds of fingernails scratching, rising and falling in rhythm with her heartbeat. Then came the voice of her uncle, distant, breaking apart with static. God forgive me, the house has chosen her. The floorboards split with a deafening crack, the darkness swallowed her whole. To be continued.